The flood in Genesis chapter 7 is the necessary baptism that makes us a new creation. Why was baptism necessary? So we know from Genesis 5 and Genesis chapter 6 that there was bloodshed on a horrific scale. You had Cain and all of his descendants that were murderers. For example, Lamech, who would boast that I can kill as many people as I want and there will be no consequences. You have the Nephilim that were these giants, these warrior giants that ruled through terror. Genesis 6 says that their hearts and their eyes and their thoughts were set on evil and killing continually. That's all they thirsted for. And we know from Genesis 4, when innocent blood is shed, it cries out to God. And therefore, every single time an innocent person's blood was shed, there was a cry that went out to God. Almost a continual screaming. That's the scale at which the murdering was on. Not only that, but we know from Cain's experience that God's response to an innocent person being murdered is that murderer, everywhere they go, the ground will be cursed. The ground will no longer bear fruit or bear food for them. So now you even have creation, plants, and even animals suffering, choked up, unproductive, dying because of the killing that humans were doing. We know God didn't just curse the ground for Cain, but for everyone else, because in Genesis 8, God says, "Never again will I curse the ground for man's sake." So that was a continual thing that happened. So the visual image that we get about how the land was in this time is barren. Think of a desert. No fruit, no vegetation, nothing growing. It's a barren land. But also we know that there was a lot of bloodshed. So picture a desert with spots of blood, with dead bodies or mass graves. All of those pools of blood crying out to God. It's a continuous scream in God's ear. And this horror scene kept happening for 10 generations. In Genesis 5, we get a whole lineage from Adam. And only in the 7th generation do we get Enoch, a man who walked with God. That's 7 generations of no one thinking about God at all, being like the previous generation, repeating the terrible acts until Enoch. In fact, Enoch was so good that God himself took him. He said, "Yeah, you don't need to be here." And then in the 10th generation comes another goodie, Noah. And it's at this point that God says, I need to do something. I cannot continuously listen to these screams. I am a just God. And through grief and justice, God acts. He says, I will destroy them because the earth is filled with violence through them. And so he tells Noah, the one goodie in the generation, to build an ark and save some creatures and save his family. But to everyone else, there's a flood coming. And the flood comes. But that flood is baptism water. The same way when we go for baptism, it cleanses us of our sins. That baptism water flood cleansed the earth, this barren, blood-filled earth, from these warriors, these warmongers, these murderers, and all of the blood that they had shed. And so finally creation can breathe. You know, after the flood, the first covenant that God made wasn't with man, it was with creation. He's basically saying, I'm so sorry that you had to die, that you were so choked up because of what man did. And that's when he says, never again will I destroy every living thing. He makes a promise to creation. That's who he apologizes to first.